The pristine white Mercedes-Benz S-Class glided through Oakwood Heights like a shark cutting through peaceful waters. Behind its tinted windows sat Patricia Wellington, freshly appointed HOA president and harbinger of the chaos about to descend upon their once tranquil community. The moving truck behind her carried not just furniture, but boxes labeled community guidelines and violation forms, an ominous preview of what was to come. Mike Chen stood at his kitchen window, absently stirring his morning coffee as he watched the procession arrive at 1242 Maple Drive. The previous HOA president, old Mr. Harrison, had retired to Florida after 15 years of easygoing leadership. His replacement had been selected through an emergency board meeting that most residents, including Mike, couldn't attend due to the oddly timed 2 p.m. Wednesday schedule. "Dad, who's that lady taking pictures of our trees?" Mike's daughter Sophie asked, her small face pressed against the window. Sure enough, Patricia Wellington had already emerged from her vehicle, designer pantsuit immaculate, wielding an iPad like a weapon as she photographed Mike's prized Japanese maple collection. Within 48 hours, the neighborhood transformed. Violation notices appeared like toxic mushrooms after rain. 47 pink slips distributed across 32 houses. The Chen residents received 3 notices alone, all meticulously time-stamped and photographed. The first criticized the non-standard foliage arrangements of Mike's Japanese maples, the same trees that had been featured in Better Homes and Gardens just 3 months prior. The second demanded immediate removal of the unauthorized garden ornaments, traditional stone lanterns that Mike's grandmother had brought from Kyoto. The third, most bizarrely, cited their mailbox for being an unapproved shade of slate gray. The community group chat exploded. Sarah from 2 doors down received a violation for excessive garden gnome deployment. She owned exactly 1 gnome, a birthday gift from her grandchildren. The Paddles violation cited non-conforming cultural decorations during Diwali. Even old Mrs. Martinez, who had lived in the neighborhood since it was built, found a notice about her aggressive rose bushes. Mike's academic nature kicked in as he began documenting everything. As a landscape architect with 15 years of experience and multiple design awards, he knew his property improvements were both tasteful and valuable to the community. His Japanese maple collection had actually increased property values on their street by 12% according to last year's real estate assessments. Patricia's next move came through official channels. A community-wide email blast announcing an emergency beautification meeting scheduled for 7 a.m. the following Saturday. The agenda included such items as standardization of acceptable plant species and implementation of unified landscape design protocols. That evening, as Mike worked late in his home office, he noticed a figure standing on the sidewalk in front of his house. Patricia Wellington, now dressed in what appeared to be safari wear complete with a wide-brimmed hat, was meticulously measuring the height of his grass with a ruler. She had a headlamp strapped to her forehead, the beam bouncing across his lawn like a searchlight. "This is getting out of hand," Mike muttered to himself, watching as she took photographs from multiple angles. His phone buzzed. A notification from the community portal showing he'd been fined $50 for grass height irregularities exceeding 0.125 inches from prescribed norm. What Patricia didn't know, as she documented Mike's supposed violations with zealous precision, was that she had just declared war on the wrong resident. Mike Chen hadn't spent 6 years on the city's Architectural Review Board and 4 years as a consultant for the National Association of Landscape Professionals to be cowed by an HOA president with a ruler and an iPad. As he watched her march away, clipboard tucked firmly under her arm, Mike opened his laptop and began searching for the official HOA bylaws. The battle for Oakwood Heights was about to begin, and Patricia Wellington had no idea what she just started. The emergency beautification meeting turned out to be exactly the powder keg Mike had anticipated. 30 bleary-eyed homeowners crammed into the community center at 7 a.m. sharp, armed with travel mugs of coffee and barely contained frustration. Patricia Wellington stood at the podium, laser pointer in hand, clicking through a 147-slide PowerPoint presentation titled Achieving Aesthetic Excellence Through Conformity. As you can see from slide 43, Patricia announced, gesturing to a photo of Mike's front yard, "Certain elements in our community have chosen to embrace a chaotic and non-standardized approach to landscaping." The photo had been edited to include garish red circles around each of his Japanese maples, with arrows pointing to imaginary violations. Mike sat quietly, taking detailed notes on his tablet. But when Sophie came home crying that afternoon, everything changed. His 8-year-old daughter had been picking flowers from their own garden, a small patch of wildflowers they'd planted together, when Patricia stormed over, waving her ever-present iPad and screaming about unauthorized flora cultivation. "She said we're destroying property values, Daddy," Sophie sniffled, clutching a crushed black-eyed Susan. "She said she'd fine us $100 per flower." That night, after tucking Sophie into bed with extra hugs and reassurance, Mike transformed his home office into an investigation headquarters. As a former consultant for housing associations, he knew exactly where to look. He requested copies of every HOA document going back 15 years, citing state law requirements for transparency and community governance. The records arrived in a suspiciously water-damaged box 3 days later. Mike spent his evenings piecing together the actual bylaws, cross-referencing them against Patricia's new guidelines. The results were staggering. Out of 126 recent violation notices, 103 cited rules that didn't exist in any official documentation. The approved plant species list Patricia had been enforcing, completely fabricated. The mandatory mailbox uniformity statute, pure fiction. But the real smoking gun came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Martinez, whose roses had been deemed aggressive, brought Mike a stack of papers she saved from 2019. They detailed a remarkably similar situation in a neighborhood called Pleasant Valley Estates, where a certain Patricia Wellington had served as HOA president for 6 tumultuous months before abruptly resigning amid allegations of document falsification. Mike methodically built his case, creating a comprehensive presentation complete with color-coded citations and photographic evidence. He even uncovered that Patricia's emergency board appointment had violated 3 separate HOA procedural requirements. The meeting hadn't been properly announced, the quorum was insufficient, and no minutes had been recorded. The day before the next board meeting, Patricia seemed to sense something was amiss. She spent 4 hours pacing in front of Mike's house, photographing every inch of his property from multiple angles. When that yielded no actionable violations, she began measuring the spaces between his garden stones with a digital caliper. "Mr. Chin," she called out as he retrieved his mail, "I notice your grass height varies by up to 0.625 inches across a 6-foot span. That's clearly a violation of Section 7.32 of our guidelines." Mike smiled politely. "I'd be very interested to see that section, Ms. Wellington. Perhaps you could bring it to tomorrow's board meeting?" Patricia's eyes narrowed behind her designer's sunglasses. She typed furiously on her iPad, probably generating another violation notice. What she didn't notice was Mike's next-door neighbor, a retired court stenographer, transcribing every word of their interaction from her kitchen window. As Patricia marched away, Mike received yet another automated fine notification. But this time he smiled. In less than 24 hours, Patricia Wellington would learn the hard way that some people actually read the fine print and knew exactly how to use it. Mike's presentation to the HOA board lasted exactly 17 minutes. He methodically laid out every fabricated rule, every falsified document, and every illegal fine Patricia had imposed. The conference room fell silent as he revealed the Pleasant Valley Estates incident, complete with notarized statements from her previous victims. Patricia's face cycled through shades of red previously unknown to science. Furthermore, Mike concluded, clicking to his final slide, Mrs. Wellington's emergency appointment was invalid under both state law and our own bylaws. All fines and violations issued under her authority are therefore null and void. The board voted unanimously to assign all penalties and launch an official review of Patricia's position. That's when something in Patricia's carefully maintained facade cracked. She stood up, pointer finger trembling as she jabbed it toward Mike. "You have no idea what you started," she hissed, her designer handbag clutched like a shield. "No idea at all." She wasn't bluffing. The next morning, Mike spotted an unfamiliar car following him to work, a black sedan with tinted windows. The same vehicle appeared behind him on his grocery runs, his gym visits, even when he took Sophie to her ballet class. A quick check of the license plate through his friend at the DMV revealed it was registered to Wellington Residential Compliance Services, LLC, a company Patricia had incorporated 3 days after the board meeting. The private investigator was just the beginning. Neighbors reported seeing Patricia prowling around Mike's property at odd hours, her iPad's camera flash piercing the darkness. Security footage from his garage cam caught her at 2 a.m. methodically sorting through his recycling bins while wearing surgical gloves and what appeared to be night vision goggles. Every local pizza delivery service suddenly refused to deliver to Mike's address. When he called to ask why, they mentioned receiving emails claiming his house was associated with dangerous individuals and repeated delivery driver harassment. The emails, unsurprisingly, came from a Gmail account named Community Standards Enforcement. Mike installed additional security cameras, but Patricia adapted. She began parking her Mercedes at the edge of the camera's range just far enough to maintain surveillance while avoiding direct recording. Motion-activated lights. She brought an umbrella lined with reflective material. Security signs. She filed a complaint with the city claiming they violated historical preservation codes that didn't actually exist. The situation reached a new level of absurdity when Patricia mounted what she called community safety speakers on her roof, aimed directly at Mike's house. The devices emitted high-pitched frequencies that she claimed were pest deterrents, but they seemed specifically designed to interfere with electronic devices. When Mike's elderly mother visited for Sunday dinner, her hearing aids malfunctioned so severely she had to remove them. "The readings are off the charts," said Tom Baker, the audio specialist Mike hired to investigate. "These aren't standard pest deterrents. They're military-grade sonic disruption devices. You can't even buy these commercially in the United States." Patricia's campaign extended beyond just Mike. Anyone who spoke to him or showed support faced immediate retaliation. The Pavels children were banned from the community pool for excessive splashing. Mrs. Martinez received daily warnings about her rose bush's aggressive growth patterns. Even the mail carrier got a notice about non-regulation package placement. But Patricia's most disturbing move came through the neighborhood's children. She began stopping them on their way home from school, offering candy in exchange for information about what their parents were saying about her. When Sophie reported this to Mike, showing him the junior community compliance officer badge Patricia had given her, he realized the situation had moved beyond mere HOA politics. That night, as Mike documented everything for his lawyer, his phone buzzed with an alert from his Tesla's security system. The camera feed showed a dark figure approaching his driveway, carrying what looked suspiciously like military equipment. Patricia Wellington was about to cross a line from which there would be no return. The Tesla's security alert chimed at precisely 6:15 a.m., its artificial intelligence detecting suspicious activity in the driveway. Mike, already awake and reviewing his legal documents, clicked on the live feed and felt his blood run cold. The night vision camera showed Patricia Wellington, dressed head to toe in tactical gear, carefully installing something into his concrete driveway entrance. She moved with practiced efficiency, as if she'd done this before. Her outfit wasn't the amateur-hour mall ninja gear Mike had expected. This was professional-grade equipment, complete with a tactical vest and what appeared to be military-spec night vision goggles. The scene would have been almost comical if it weren't so disturbing. Mike grabbed his phone and robe, hands shaking slightly as he rushed downstairs. Sophie was at her mother's this week, thank God. He called 911 en route to his front door, keeping his voice low. "There's someone installing what looks like vehicle damage devices in my driveway," he whispered, watching through the peephole as Patricia made final adjustments to her handiwork. The morning fog hung thick over Oakwood Heights as Mike cautiously opened his front door. Patricia had already vanished, but she'd left behind something that made his stomach lurch. Partially embedded in his concrete driveway were 3 professional-grade spike strips, the same type law enforcement used to stop fleeing vehicles. They'd been installed with frightening expertise, nearly invisible unless you knew exactly what to look for. "Sweet Mother of God," came a voice from across the street. Frank Martinez, Mrs. Martinez's son, and a retired traffic cop stood in his driveway still clutching his morning coffee. "Those are restricted law enforcement equipment. We use the same model in the department. They're designed to puncture and deflate vehicle tires while preventing blowouts that could cause fatal crashes. Civilians can't even purchase these legally." Mike's security cameras had captured everything in pristine 4K resolution. Patricia arriving at 3:47 a.m. in a blacked-out van with no license plates. The careful installation process complete with industrial-grade adhesive and concrete anchors. Her methodical testing of each spike's deployment mechanism. She'd even spiked the area with some kind of electronic device, presumably checking for security sensors, but she'd missed the Tesla's built-in cameras. The first police cruiser arrived within minutes, followed quickly by 3 more. Officer Sarah Chen, no relation to Mike, took one look at the spike strips and immediately called in the department's major crimes unit. "This goes way beyond HOA disputes," she explained, photographing the installation. "These devices are classified as law enforcement restricted equipment. Possession by civilians is a federal offense, and installation with intent to damage vehicles. That's attempted vehicular assault at minimum." As crime scene technicians worked, Mike's neighbors emerged from their homes, drawn by the police lights and growing commotion. Mrs. Martinez brought out coffee and her famous banana bread for the officers. The Paddles offered their own security footage, which showed Patricia conducting what appeared to be practice runs in her tactical gear the night before. Frank Martinez, now fully awake and in full ex-cop mode, pointed out professional details others had missed. "Look at the installation pattern," he noted, showing the lead detective his observations. "This is an amateur hour. These are positioned exactly like we did for high-risk traffic stops. Whoever supplied these didn't just sell them, they provided training." Mike stood in his doorway, watching the sun rise over the surreal scene in his driveway. His phone buzzed, another HOA violation notice from Patricia's automated system, citing him for unauthorized gathering of emergency vehicles and a disruption of community aesthetic standards. The timestamp showed she'd sent it from somewhere nearby, probably watching the whole scene unfold. But this time, Mike smiled as he read the notice. Because he knew something Patricia didn't. His Tesla's cameras hadn't just recorded her installing the spike strips. They also captured her testing them on her own vehicle last night. proving both possession and knowledge of their purpose. Patricia Wellington's reign of terror was about to meet federal law enforcement. Detective Sarah Martinez had seen her share of bizarre cases during her 15 years with the department's major crimes unit, but this one was special. Seated at her desk, surrounded by evidence boxes labeled Wellington/HOA, she stared at her computer screen in disbelief. Patricia Wellington's digital footprint was a masterclass in how not to cover your tracks. "You need to see this," she called to her partner, Detective James Wong. "Our HOA president's been busy." She turned her monitor to show him the search history from Patricia's work laptop, which they'd seized during the initial warrant execution. The queries told a story of escalating obsession. How to slash tires legally, ways to damage vehicles without getting caught, spike strips, law enforcement grade, sonic weapons for crowd control. Can HOA presidents arrest people? How to make tire damage look like accident. But it was Patricia's PayPal history that truly set off alarm bells. A series of payments totaling $2,400 had been made to an account labeled Tactical Solutions Unlimited, using her official HOA email address. The shipping address matched an ongoing FBI investigation into stolen law enforcement equipment. "Check this out," Wong said, pulling up another document. She expense reported the spike strips to the HOA as community security enhancement devices. Even submitted an invoice. Apparently, the HOA treasurer approved it without actually reading what she was buying. The investigation expanded like a spider's web. Patricia's home office yielded 3 external hard drives filled with surveillance photos of every house in Oakwood Heights. Each folder was meticulously labeled with the homeowner's name, daily routines, and suggested pressure points for forcing compliance with her rules. The garage was worse. Behind a false wall panel, they discovered a stockpile of what the evidence text called a greatest hits of vehicle vandalism. Professional-grade spike strips, shame barriers, and what appeared to be homemade caltrops fashioned from sharpened garden tools. A notebook nearby contained detailed diagrams of the neighborhood's driveways, complete with optimal placement marks for deterrent devices. "This goes way beyond HOA enforcement," Martinez muttered, photographing the cache. "This is military-grade equipment mixed with homemade weapons. The FBI is going to have a field day with this." The investigation also revealed a pattern of financial manipulation. Patricia had been using HOA funds to finance her surveillance operation, disguising equipment purchases as community improvements. The sonic device aimed at Mike's house, listed as bird control system in the HOA budget. The night vision goggles, emergency lighting assessment tools. But the most damning evidence came from Patricia's cloud storage. Her meticulous nature had worked against her. She documented everything. Photos showed her testing spike strips in her garage, emails detailed her negotiations with black market suppliers, and a particularly incriminating video showed her practicing deployment techniques in tactical gear. "Look at this," Martinez said, pulling up a spreadsheet. "She's got psychological profiles on every resident. Notes on their vulnerabilities, pressure points, even their children's schedules. She was planning to escalate far beyond spike strips." The FBI's forensic team discovered that Patricia had used her work VPN to access restricted law enforcement supply websites. Her browser history showed hundreds of visits to forums discussing police tactical equipment, and she'd made multiple attempts to purchase riot control gear using falsified department credentials. As Martinez compiled her report, a notification popped up on her screen. The FBI had matched Patricia's tactical gear purchases to 3 other cases across the state, all involving HOA presidents who had gone rogue. She'd been operating under different names, moving from community to community, leaving a trail of terrorized homeowners in her wake. "Call the DA," Martinez told Wong, reaching for her phone. "This isn't just about the spike strips anymore. We're looking at a pattern of organized criminal activity, identity fraud, and misappropriation of law enforcement equipment. Ms. Wellington's about to learn that real handcuffs are very different from her HOA rulebook." As Detective Martinez's investigation deepened, Patricia Wellington's carefully constructed facade crumbled like a house of cards in a hurricane. The FBI's forensic accountants had discovered shell companies in 3 states, each tied to different HOA presidencies, each following the same pattern of escalating harassment and equipment purchases. "It's like she had a playbook," Agent Rebecca Torres explained, spreading documents across the conference room table. She'd get elected or appointed to an HOA board, usually during emergency meetings with suspicious timing. Then she'd start small, nitpicky violations, arbitrary rules. But it always escalated to surveillance and physical intimidation. The Pleasant Valley Estates incident wasn't an isolated case, it was part of a pattern. 3 other communities had taken out restraining orders against Patricia under different aliases: Patricia Westbrook in Colorado, Patricia Whitman in Nevada, and Patricia Windsor in Arizona. Each time, she fled just before authorities could build a case, leaving behind a trail of traumatized homeowners and depleted HOA accounts. "Look at this," Torres said, pulling up body camera footage from a Nevada police officer. The video showed a garage nearly identical to the one in Oakwood Heights, complete with tactical gear and vehicle modification equipment. She's been perfecting this system for years. Each community was like a testing ground for new tactics. The garage discoveries have triggered a federal investigation. Patricia's supplier network stretched across state lines involving multiple restricted equipment dealers. Her tactical gear wasn't just high-end. Some pieces were classified items restricted to military and law enforcement use. The night vision goggles found in her possession were next-generation prototypes that hadn't even been released to most police departments. Back in Oakwood Heights, forensics teams were still processing Patricia's home office. The discoveries became increasingly disturbing. A hidden room behind her bedroom closet contained wall-to-wall monitors displaying live feeds from cameras she'd secretly installed throughout the neighborhood. Each screen was labeled with resident names, daily routines, and what she called compliance potential scores. Her personal notebook, found in a fireproof safe, read like a military operations manual. Every resident was categorized and analyzed with frightening precision. Mike's entry spanned 12 pages, including detailed observations of Sophie's ballet schedule and his mother's visiting patterns. She even drafted contingency plans for different scenarios, with sections titled Emergency Response to Legal Challenge and Asset Denial Operations. "This goes way beyond HOA enforcement," Martinez said, flipping through the notebook. She was running psychological warfare operations against families over lawn ornaments and paint colors. The investigation revealed Patricia's background was itself a carefully crafted lie. Her claimed credentials in property management were fabricated. The prestigious universities on her resume had never heard of her. Even her Mercedes was leased under a false identity, paid for with misappropriated HOA funds. What they did discover was a series of suspicious insurance claims following her departure from each community. Vehicles damaged by unknown vandals, homes mysteriously flooded, gardens destroyed by unidentified chemicals. Each incident had resulted in substantial payouts to shell companies linked to Patricia's various aliases. The FBI's cybercrime unit uncovered encrypted files detailing future plans for Oakwood Heights. Patricia had mapped out a three-phase strategy she called Operation Community Excellence. Phase 1 involved the surveillance and intimidation they'd already seen. Phase 2, scheduled to begin the week after the Spike Strip incident, included plans for widespread property damage disguised as accidents. Phase 3 was simply labeled Total Compliance Achievement, with a budget sheet listing military-grade crowd control equipment. She wasn't just planning to control the neighborhood. Agent Torres concluded, closing her laptop. She was preparing for a full takeover. Those spike strips weren't the endgame. They were just the beginning. As the evidence mounted, one question remained. How had Patricia Wellington managed to operate this scheme across multiple states for years without detection? The answer, as it turned out, was hidden in plain sight, and it would shock even the most hardened investigators on the case. The arrest of Patricia Wellington couldn't have been scripted better if Hollywood had tried. It was a bright Tuesday morning, and she was conducting what she called an emergency compliance inspection of the Johnson family's front yard. Armed with her signature iPad, ruler, and a newly purchased laser level, she was measuring their grass height with scientific precision. Section 7.42 clearly states that grass must maintain a uniform height of exactly 2.75 inches, she lectured Mr. Johnson, who was recording the entire interaction on his phone. Your southwestern quadrant shows variations of up to 0.086 inches. This is a clear violation off. The sound of police sirens cut through her monologue. 4 patrol cars, 2 unmarked FBI vehicles, and a tactical response unit rolled into Oakwood Heights in perfect formation. Patricia's face cycled through emotions, confusion, realization, panic, and finally, indignation. "This is an unauthorized police presence," she shrieked, frantically typing on her iPad. "Emergency vehicles must file for aesthetic approval 72 hours before entering the community. I'm issuing citations to each vehicle for non-compliant paint schemes." Detective Martinez stepped out of her vehicle, arrest warrant in hand. "Patricia Wellington," she began, but Patricia had already shifted into full HOA mode. "Your vehicle's window tint is 0.03% darker than regulation standards," she declared, backing away while still typing furiously. "And those light bars are definitely not approved under our architectural guidelines. I'll need to see permits for." "Ms. Wellington," Agent Torres interrupted, "you're under arrest for possession of restricted law enforcement equipment, criminal harassment, identity fraud, and interstate conspiracy." Patricia clutched her iPad like a shield. "I have the authority. By law 15.7 clearly gives the HOA president power to." She stopped mid-sentence, staring at her tablet in horror as it suddenly went dark. The FBI's tech team had just remotely disabled all her devices. The body cam footage from Officer Chen captured what happened next, footage that would later go viral on multiple social media platforms. Patricia still wearing her HOA enforcement badge, which they later discovered she ordered from a trophy shop, attempted to cite the arresting officers for improper uniform maintenance and non-regulation footwear. Your handcuffs don't match our community's approved metal finishes, she protested as Martinez read her rights. This is a clear violation of Section 12.31. The crowd of neighbors that had gathered grew larger by the minute. Mrs. Martinez was live streaming the whole thing for her grandchildren. The Patels were openly celebrating on their front lawn. Someone had even ordered pizza for everyone, delivered right to Mike's house, now that the dangerous individual warnings had been rescinded. As officers led Patricia to the patrol car, she made one last desperate attempt at asserting authority. This is an illegal gathering. No more than 3 residents may congregate without filing a community event application. I'm adding points to everyone's violation records. The final touch came from Sophie, Mike's daughter, who had just returned from ballet class. Standing safely between her father and Officer Chen, she called out, "Ms. Wellington, your handcuffs don't match your outfit. That's a fashion violation." The entire crowd, including several officers, burst into laughter. Patricia's face turned a shade of red that definitely violated the HOA's approved color palette. Inside Patricia's house, the evidence collection continued. Officers discovered a wall of screens still displaying live feeds from her illegal surveillance network, a filing cabinet full of falsified violation notices ready to be distributed, and a detailed calendar marking the planned dates for Operation Community Excellence, Phase 3. "You don't understand," Patricia shouted as they placed her in the patrol car. "Without me, this community will descend into chaos. People will plant unauthorized flowers. They'll paint their mailboxes non-regulation colors. They might even," she gasped in horror, "install lawn ornaments." The patrol car door closed on her final tirade about proper garbage bin placement protocols. As the police convoy pulled away, neighbors began exchanging hugs and phone numbers, many meeting properly for the first time without fear of citation. Someone had already started planning a block party with unauthorized decorations.